The order was given out by the Lord Mayor that wise and trusty friend of the town of Mansoul, that person should be employed about this necessary business. And Mr. Godly Fear and one Mr. Upright were to be overseers about this matter. So persons were put under them to work in the fields and to bury the slain that lay dead in the plains. And these were their places of employment. Some were to make the graves, some to bury the dead, and some were to go to and fro in the plains and also round about the borders of Mansoul to see if a skull or a bone or a piece of a bone of a doubter was yet to be found above ground, where near the corporation, and if any were found, it was ordered that the searchers that search should set up a mark thereby, and a sign that those that were appointed to bury them might find it, and bury it out of sight, and that the name and remembrance of a Diabolus doubter might be blotted out from under the heaven, and that the children, and they that were to be born in Mansoul, might not know, if possible, such a skull, what a bone or a piece of a bone of a doubter was. So the buriers and those that were appointed for that purpose did as they were commanded. They buried the doubters, and all the skulls and bones, and pieces of bones of doubters, wherever they found them, and so they cleansed the plains. Now also Mr. God's peace took up his commission and acted again as in former days. Thus they buried in the plains about Mansoul the election doubters, the vocation doubters, the grace doubters, the perseverance doubters, the resurrection doubters, the salvation doubters, and the glory doubters, whose captains were Captain Rage, Captain Cruel, Captain Damnation, Captain Insatiable, Captain Brimstone, Captain Torment, Captain No Ease, Captain Sepulchre, and Captain Past Hope. And old Incredulity was under Diabolus their general. There were also the 7 heads of their army, and they were the Lord Beelzebub, the Lord Lucifer, the Lord Legion, the Lord Apollyon, the Lord Python, the Lord Cerberus, and the Lord Belial. But the princes and the captains, with old Incredulity, their general, did all them make their escape. So their men fell down, slain by the power of the prince's forces, and by the hands of the men of the town of Mansoul. They also were buried, as is afore related, to the exceeding great joy of the now famous town of Mansoul. They that buried them buried also with them their arms, which were cruel instruments of death. They buried also their armor, their colors, banners, with the standard of Diabolus, and what elsesoever they could find that did but smell of the Diabolus doubter. Now when the tyrant had arrived at Hell's Gate Hill, with his old friend Incredulity, they immediately descended the den, and having there with their fellows for a while condoled their misfortune and great loss they sustained against the town of Mansoul, they fell at length into a passion, and revenged they would be for the loss that they sustained before the town of Mansoul. Wherefore they presently called a council to contrive yet further what was to be done against the famous town of Mansoul. For their yawning paunches could not wait to see the result of their Lord Lucifer's and their Lord Apollyon's counsel that they had given before, for their raging gorge thought every day, even as long as a short forever, until they were filled with a body and soul, with the flesh and bones, and with all the delicates of Mansoul. They therefore resolved to make another attempt upon the town of Mansoul, and that by an army mixed and made up partly of doubters and partly of bloodmen. A more particular account now take of both. The doubters are such as have their name from their nature, as well as from the land and kingdom where they are born. Their nature is to put a question upon every one of the truths of Emmanuel, and their country is called the land of doubting, and that land lieth far off, and farthest remote to the north, between the land of darkness and that called the valley of the shadow of death, maybe between Boston and D.C. For though the land of darkness and that called the valley of the shadow of death be sometimes called as if they were one in the selfsame place, yet indeed they are two, lying but a little way asunder, and the land of doubting points in and lieth between them. This is the land of doubting, and these that came with Diabolus to ruin the town of Mansoul are the natives of